welcome to Monetizing Innovation. I'm John Holcomb, the best-selling author of Creating Value Faster. Innovation isn't just the big idea on the whiteboard. It's the hard decisions, the missed signals, and the leaders who keep moving forward anyway. This show dives into the real stories behind breakthroughs in life sciences, healthcare, and tech, how ideas become results, how teams align under pressure, and how strategy turns into execution. If you're building something bold or looking for clarity to lead with confidence, you're in the right place. Press play and let's turn innovation to impact. Well, again, welcome to the show. We have a great guest today. I'm very pleased to introduce. Gigi is a dynamic leader known for driving impact at the intersection of strategy, innovation, and execution. With experiences helping organizations navigate growth, transformation, and complex challenges, Gigi brings a practical, people-centered approach to turning ideas into measurable results. Known for clarity of thinking and strong execution, he helps teams move from ambition to action. Join us as we explore leadership, innovation, and what it takes to consistently deliver value in today's fast-moving environment. Thanks for joining me today, Gigi. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, John.
Absolutely. It was so great having the pleasure to meet you several times before the episode and really learning about your innovative approach to business and some of the work that you've been doing with some of your new products, looking at the marketing playbooks, looking at really strategic direction for companies and helping folks out. Could you share a little bit more with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're specifically talking about Impel Hub, which is very dear to my heart and my own challenges. I mentioned I am not a marketer or anything related to growth. I don't claim fame or skill set or experience. I'm a technologist. I have been a technologist for the last 30 plus years and worked with the large enterprises and many small organizations and many startups. And throughout that experiences, I learned the ability to spot opportunities. And then, I did the mistakes many makes all the time, jump into execution fast, learn from it. Then during that journey, I felt that many times the most important factor in successfully growing a business is marketing, right? And from a technology founder perspective, that's the hardest and that's the hard part ever. So about 19 months, I took a different route to figuring out the growth strategies like an engineer would do, completely based on rational logics and numbers. I created this platform called Impel Hub. And today we have served a number of clients, about 98% success rate. Yeah, so it has been an amazing journey. Yeah.
No, and it's such an amazing journey too, because I think you took really I would say, a non-intuitive approach, right, to how to approach marketing and integrate really a more first principles approach, right, that you typically do in an engineering approach, but you applied it to actually some of the business models and some of the tools. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So for me, everything was a learning. Last 2 years, I'm still learning many of the things about marketing and growth hacking, still a student of it. So first, my approach was, how do I learn, right? That was my first challenge. And at this time, we don't have time is the most rarest element on earth today. And how do we learn? My strategy was LinkedIn became my playground. I started connecting with many marketers in LinkedIn and created a skill to understand, are they promoting or are there is truly substance in it to look so that I understand. So that was one. The second thing I did was I created the next thing I said, what is the end goal here, right? I start with the end. So my end goal was at that, an end goal will change as we learn, but my first end goal was define what is growth. How do I define growth in the most simplest form that anybody can understand? Not marketing or geek speak. And what does that hypothesis mean? Right? How does that look like? So mine was, if I understand, in order to understand the growth, I need to understand the customers, understand the competition, and understand the industry and the business, right? If I can understand those three elements at a very high level, that we are at a very high level, I should be able to figure out the growth strategies for any business. And so then what's the equation for that? I formed that equation. Then I figure, okay, that's a general principle. If I want to bring that to the specific business that I'm working with, what else I need to understand? So the pestle factors, political, economical, social factors, how does that affect that business? I found that framework. And then the objectives and constraints of the business, right? That's super important. So that was the second layer I added to that process. And the next layer was, okay, everybody start talking about, in order to grow, the growth is defined in something called a playbook, right? Then I started researching, what is the playbook? Who does the playbook the best? So I came to know that there are these companies called McKinsey, Bain, BCGs of the world who does this better than anybody out there, supposedly. And then, it is very costly, it's time consuming and costly. How do we adapt that using AI? How do we adapt their methodologies to the company, this founder that I'm working with, right? So now I have the context. Once I have the context that contains the business, the industry, the competition, and the customer journey, and the objectives and constraints, now if I can form the context, I can figure out what are the best methodologies that I need to bring in to help them to figure out the growth strategies and the funnel of it, right? Then I started looking at the funnel. It was all learning, constantly evolving learning. When I started looking at the funnel, I was fascinated by two concepts I coined: the structure of the funnel and the shape of the funnel. When it comes to the shape, there is a traditional funnel, which is the real, it looks like a funnel. Then on this side, Ryan Fishkin and Google talk about messy middle and the pinboard funnel. So I kind of did extensive research on it and figured out that there are not only these two, there are other three different shape of the funnels out there. So I have the context. Then I looked at the context and figured it out. There is a process we can build to figure out the precise shape of the funnel of the client for this business. So now I have the funnel and the structure. This 80 from the structure I define as the best practice from the best of the best. So I put everything together and build a precise playbook and growth strategy plan and playbook for the client that we are working with.
Yeah.
It has produced some amazing results for the clients we have worked with.
But one of the things that's just so powerful about that, and I really love the way that you've done that, right, is a lot of AI is starting to be talked about in the marketplace, right? But a lot of folks don't necessarily understand that you have to have AI only is as good as the information that you input to it, right? And some of that knowledge that you gain by really becoming a student, right? Really going deep and understanding the fundamentals of the businesses, now you're able to help train an appropriate A model to do some really powerful things to help businesses.
Yeah, I would add to that it is not only about the information you put it in, it's also about the cadence that you ask the information. So for me, I call it a Lego architecture. So again, you have this end goal. The end goal in that world is creating a playbook that contains the precise funnel that's built for the business. That's the end goal. Now, in order to build this, we can work backwards. What do we need to build that, right? That becomes the second layer of Lego pieces. Then in order to build the second layer, what do we need to have? What do we need to have in the third layer, and so forth and so on. So, and again, I didn't figure this out backwards. I figured it forward. Now I'm thinking backwards. The quality comes from starting from the base and then use the building blocks of the base to build the next block and the next block and next block. So that's what, so that cadence also matters, not only how you ask what information, how you ask the question beyond that. And then the second fact is that know your strengths, and more importantly, know your LLM's weaknesses. And so how do we compensate that? You bring that expert who understand the process, who understand the shortcomings of the LLMs that you work with. So come out with certain processes to mitigate that risk so that your quality goes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's powerful, right? Is having that insight to help guide and shape, right, the right Lego pieces to put together and then help actually build that foundation.
Yeah. And also these Lego pieces, when you think about that, using the same analogy, know that every Lego pieces needs to be built for that business, right? It is not a generic Lego pieces that you're using. You're taking generic concept, but you're at every step of the way you're building that Lego pieces for the business. So that at the end, what you get is a playbook and a growth strategies and playbook that precisely speak to the needs and objectives and constraints of the business, not generic.
Now, and I think that's so important, right? Because yeah, you're actually tailoring it specifically to the business that you're working with, right? To really make sure that you've included the right factors that matter.
Yeah. Every brick is built for the business. Every brick of this thing is built for the business.
No, I love that. And one of the things, if you could just maybe share a little bit more, what really was that pain point that you decided you were going to actually build a business off of this particular concept?
Because back in the day, after 20 plus years in corporate, I started venturing into the world of startups. For many years, I tried to launch multiple startups, and everything I don't think the product idea was not the issue. And in some cases, the timing was the issue. I was a little ahead of the time. Most of the time, the problem was I didn't know. I thought that if I build it, if I find an opportunity and I talked to a couple of customers and if the need is there, then if I build it, then the masses will come. They didn't come because for one reason, main reason was I didn't know how to market. Then when I launched my current company, Vertina, and I started competing with the best of the best. At the end of the day, we are an e-commerce engineering company, Vertina, and I competed with the digital marketing agencies. And under Vertina, when I talked to many of my clients, they went from an agency to agency to agency every 6 months to 1 year, right? For whatever reason. So I felt that there's a frustration around figuring out how the pain is much deeper and bigger, in figuring out growth, what needs to be done in terms of growth. And the pattern I saw was most of the time the solution provider gave more emphasis to the execution, right? And please keep in mind that no two companies are same. Time, location, a lot of things changes. Even though they are the same industry, a lot of things can change. And therefore, what is lacking from the market is that the base fundamental, the strategy. And it is very interesting that still today, if you go to LinkedIn, type in growth strategies, for example, or how to market something about growth, I bet about 85 to 90% of the conversation that LinkedIn is going to show you is literally about execution. How to the automation of execution that is incorrectly represented as strategy. I don't know how we got into that position, but unfortunately, growth strategy is not about execution. It's about really strategizing, coming up with that precise funnel. Here is the cadence that you need. Here is a priority. Here is what you're going after. Here is the priority. And here are the objectives that you are trying to achieve and the rationale behind it. That's what strategy is, right? It is like going to war. You don't talk about, let's go destroy or do X. What? The strategy behind that decision is how you came to that decision is the strategy. People often forget about it. So I was fascinated how come the world is forgetting about this fundamental issue. And that was my problem. And that was my client's problem.
Yeah, I love that insight, right? That you notice the pattern, because I definitely would agree with you. Like that is one of the big patterns today, right? Especially in an age where we have more and more information I would argue it's information overload sometimes, right? So that you can get lost in the noise if you're not focused on what your strategy is and how to get to the results that you want.
Yeah, strategy is everything, right? Because if you don't have strategy, there's no clarity. It's hard to get clarity. It's hard to get consensus, right? And it's hard to communicate. So everything is hinges upon understanding of what you're doing. Why are you doing what you're doing, right?
Yeah, it's sort of that North Star, right? You need to have that North Star that can keep everybody aligned and focused on here is the goal. Here's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why I got fascinated by it and my own challenges. I'm feeling that clients that I work with had the same challenges.
And when you look at some of your clients now, right, I think you found not only were they challenged by it, but they truly appreciated your approach to how you were able to help bring clarity, right, to what their
Yeah.
business really was about.
Yes, and constantly what really excites me is that when we pitch ImperHub to clients, most of the time they start by saying that I don't need it, right? We know what we do. We can do this using ChatGPT, right? What we do. We can use ChatGPT. And then they go ask ChatGPT, they execute the plan, they see that this is not exactly what they look for. And then when they engage us and clients who's kind of reluctant to look at it or allocate investment, time, money, people to do something, they just go 180 degrees, right? So the conversations become, oh, I don't want to do it. I don't know why I need to do this. To become that conversation become how soon you can do this because I feel and I sense, I feel, I agree that this strategy I must execute because of this. How
Absolutely.
how fast we can do it, what's the priority here? Can you tell me the priority of execution out of this? That's the kind of conversation when we are having when we go through that exercise, and a lot of aha moment, a lot of surprises. Some of the many times we have certain modules in there, we have specifically asked question, did you know about this ICP? We often hear, I didn't think about that ICP. Or did you know about this competitor? They would say, I didn't even think about that competitor. Did you know about the strategies that competitor is implementing? They were like, no, we didn't know that. So that's kind of surprising, not surprising. That's very, so identifying the gaps and missed opportunities and how do we come up with, if they are doing all of this, if your customers want this, if your competition is meeting this, what is the gap in between, right?
You highlight such a big importance though, right? Because I see it happen more often than not, especially in the entrepreneurial space, right? But I would say
Yeah,
even in corporate spaces as
yeah,
well, that if they're not really clear on the fundamentals, and I've had many situations where folks want to rush to execution, right? But they're rushing to execution on a target they don't know.
yeah.
And that's the clarity, I think, especially the work that you've been providing is so powerful, right? Because it really puts it back in strategy, back front and center. And, we're going to learn along the way, right? The strategy can be
Yeah.
modified as you learn from the marketplace.
Yeah, I have a very interesting story. We were doing a envelope growth strategy study with a client, it's a small client in a high risk product area. So they are there are a lot of constraints about. So the client was reluctant about first engaging us. This is a very high risk product. We cannot do X, A, B, C, and D. We can only do this, and everybody does that. So I was able to convince him that spend some resources on this. You need to have a strategy. If you're going to war, you better have a strategy. So during the study, one of the strategies that the system suggested is that when it comes to organic growth, go get a Wikipedia link. Okay, and I started scratching my head and say, why do you suggest? It's very hard to get a Wikipedia link for a commercial business.
Right.
And our system figured it out that the client's name has a historical place name, right? In it. It's very significant. That name is very significant. And therefore, system suggested that they should be trying to get a Wikipedia link mentioned in Wikipedia. So then I asked, what is the rationale behind it? So rationale is your name is an historical place. Then I asked, give me an evidence for it. He said, here is a competitor who was mentioned in Wikipedia, and they are bringing X hundreds of traffic because of that one link, right? And the client was like, I would not have thought for a million years that's one of the strategy, that strategy to go get a Wikipedia link. It could be as simple as that.
Absolutely. No, and I think to your point, that's one of the things when you think about, especially as a new entrant to a marketplace, right? There's so many things that you're trying to do, right, as a new business owner or an entrepreneur. And some of the things that might be better understood in a well-established business, it's all new learnings at that point. And so sometimes it's easy to miss, right, some of these significant factors. And if we can help folks recognize those, that really does speed up the learning cycle so that they can really accelerate the business.
Yeah, and doing that, the challenge and the excitement is that how do you figure out the precise growth strategies within the constraints of the business, right? If you're a startup, you have only limited resources. How do you figure out that that precise growth strategies that you can utilize within the time, people, resource, skill set constraints, money, those constraints, and political, legal, all the other factors. So that has been the interesting, you know,
No, I can definitely agree with you because arguably, right, that's probably one of the most constrained times in any business, right, is at that time
yeah,
because you,
the needle in the haystack, right?
exactly.
Needles in the haystack.
No, I think that's a fantastic analogy. And what's really interesting to me to hear your journey as well is, your passion really comes out, right? It seems like this is an area where you've really found passion in trying to help others, but it's also applying some of these principles, right, of how to really drive similar rigor to marketing that you did with your technology background.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking about passion, so now uh, as everybody knows, AI is democratizing many things, right? Including execution and including the knowledge, including the skills, including the creativity aspect. So there is a lot of things AI is democratizing.
Mhm.
Now, I believe that what really going to matter for the people who really want to succeed is that passion. Right here, the fire in the belly, that's one. Second, the curiosity. The second ingredient, you have to become a curious cat to understand, to learn, and at least get out of your comfort zone and be curious about being out of comfort zone. And the third one is like to a certain extent creativity, right? To a certain extent, because I think that at some point that creativity will be also you'll be able to borrow it from AI at some point. But that curiosity and passion, that's very humane, right? That's in us. So if you can just flex those muscles,
I completely agree with you. And in fact, I often call it being a student of the business, right? Because
yeah,
you have to dive deep with that curiosity, with
yeah,
that desire to learn. And, what's interesting, especially if you go into complex businesses, you find that sometimes there's a lot of moving pieces, especially if you were, say, in I'd say, regulated industry, for instance, right? And
yeah,
if you don't have that curiosity and have that passion, it'll quickly fail, right? Because it just you get crushed in terms of just the natural momentum of that business
yeah,
cycle.
yeah. And I would add one more thing to it: the mentality, right?
Yeah.
The attitude. Whether you work for yourself or work for somebody else, you have to switch. You have to think in that person's or the owner's shoes, right? You have to have that ownership mentality. Then only you can produce. All the rest anyone else can produce. If you hire me, if I can think with you as you think, I may be new to your business, but I have tools to I come with the tools to understand your processes from a multi-dimensional aspect, right? And I have processes to help me to guide me through. Only thing I'm lacking is understanding your business that I'm going to learn. Then if I can start thinking in your shoes as an owner, then together we can create some wonders. We can operate it like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that is so critical. And, the one that, or actually, there's multiple things I've learned over the years, but one of the things that really resonates with me is, from industry to industry, sector to sector, you know, the fundamental business principles are still the same, right? But it's then what is the environment? What is sort of the context, right? Of where you go into that business and what are the levers to pull. But the fundamental process and business systems are, in essence, very much the same. And it's how you understand and become that student, have a owner's mindset. I think that is so critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's fascinating too when you thought about this journey. It's been, you said, what was it, 3 years now that you started up this portion of your business?
Impala has been around only for around 18, 20 months.
Okay.
I launched the product in the last 8 months only. The UI has been around only for 6 to 8 months.
Well, and it's so fantastic, right? Because even in that short time since the product launch, you've had multiple customers that this has truly resonated with. And how have you taken their feedback to then continually improve the work that you've been doing?
We take their feedback every step of the way, right? Improving the quality of the output, improving the experience. How do we make it even more? So it's all about the UI of any application today is about helping the client to make decisions. Customers are influenced by AI to make decisions faster nowadays, right? Now, how does the UI helps to make that decision even faster? That has been our thinking, our efforts went into that. So like for example, if you are given n number of strategies, n number of competitors, n number of ICPs, how does the UI help the clients to make the decision as to know, what, I'm going to put my money on that strategy, right? So coming up with a scoring system, innovation score, impact score, or a similarity score for competition identification and selection, or an ICP score, etc., has been truly helping our clients to figure out to move through this process faster. So that's why one of the goals I laid out was very in the beginning. I don't want to, in the traditional consulting, the discovery happens first, then delivery happens second, and sometimes that can be taxing to the companies that you work with, because they are given information packets. Go get this information, and then the consultant will ingest that information, come up with the solutions or whatever. What I thought was that's taxing. Therefore, we have to change that process into, I know as a consultant, I know what information I need to collect. My systems are going to collect that information, then present the information to the client in such a way that by looking at that information is presented in such a way that they can make that decision very fast. And then we are compressing the time. So we have speed to ROI, speed to execution, speed to ROI. That was very important. So there are many features. All this has been incorporated into the platform. That's how we're applying this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's so powerful. When you think, because I think something you said there is so important, right? I think in this age of AI, one of the things is we are seeing these speed compression cycles, right? In business and even for a consumer, things are actually going faster in terms of that decision-making process, probably than ever before. But what is your recommendation to business owners that are, say, grappling with that at the moment? What are some things that you would help recommend as you look at fellow entrepreneurs and innovators, and that's, just kind of in general?
I'm going to say something that it's not because ImpulHub is a strategy platform, I'm trying to sell strategy. Regardless, the strategy it is your differentiation. It has becoming your differentiation. And because using AI, you can experiment, you can get answers fast. Then if you sprinkle your experience, your intuition, and your understanding of the world, if you sprinkle that on the top of what AI gives you, you can make pretty accurate decision, right? Uh, that is one. And if everybody is executing in that mode, what is left? How do you differentiate? How would you compete? Your strategy, right? You better fine tune that, right? And keep it fine tuned.
It kind of gets back to, if you're not clear about your strategy, the uniqueness you provide, unique value, right? It's easy to get lost in the noise of everything else.
Yeah, yeah, and you keep it fine tuned.
Exactly.
The pestle factors. So once you build a strategy, there are two things that changes: the pestle factors, political, economical, social, legal, etc. factors, and your competition changes the strategy. So keep, beware of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you look at, some of the, say, entrepreneurs, right, that they're trying to rapidly scale their business, are there any insights that you would share? Because, sometimes the strategies shift a little, right? You still may have the ultimate strategy, but some of the ways that you look, especially through your analysis, what are some insights that you might share with folks that are trying to rapidly scale?
Yeah. So you are aware. I'm going to give you my thinking. Always has been like this. You know your Z point, right? Your Z point. You are executing on the A. You're thinking about the B. You're kind of little bit of pondering on the C, not beyond that. What you're working on today, the B and C, always ready to change. You understand what factors is going to change your A, B, and C, and see and understand how that change will affect the Z point, right? And some of the changes you are only affecting A and B because that has to be successful. That may not have greater impact on the Z point, but on the other hand, some of the things that you experience will change the B point and will have a serious effect on the Z point. Nowadays, the good thing about is that using AI, you can model this, right? You can easily model that and figure out whether how much of a change, this particular change, how it impacts your A point, B point, and C point. Not beyond that. Don't look at D, E, and F. That's going to come as you go through.
I love what you mentioned there too, right? Because that is something that I think is a little bit different today than where it was, even just as short as 10 years ago. Large companies could often do some of those modeling exercises, right? They had the resources, but now AI, right? That's where it becomes a little bit of the great leveler is now even small businesses can do this complex modeling that used to be only, big companies that had large engineering teams might be able to do.
Yeah, and also this back in the day, the Z point existed in the fifth year or 10th year or something like that. Nowadays, your Z point is maybe in the next 12 months.
Exactly.
Or 6 months, So that's another factor. But the beautiful thing about is this: once you have the strategy done, then AI helps you to compress that execution time, right?
Absolutely.
And in order to execute, you may not need an expert that you pay $100,000 to execute. That's the beautiful thing.
It really is, right? When you think about that, there's significant return on investment for a lot of these companies that can make them far more competitive and really execute, right? Which is fantastic.
And make the customer happy because now you're executing. Now you can meet their demands faster, more accurately, more faster. So tame the monster. Right?
Absolutely. And I think it's great because whether it's business to consumer, business to business, again, you can actually meet those customer needs quicker by actually doing a lot of this work.
Yeah. And if you have time, I can tell you an analogy. Like, for example, 60 to 80% of B2B world, according to my research, Gardner, McKinsey of the Forrester of the world, 60 to 80% of the manufacturer B2B world, distributor, etc., still serves their customers using PDFs, right? And I would say, I don't think the money is the issue. And it's because the change and the time it takes to make that change That's the fundamental issue. If you're the manufacturer of a, let's say, $50 million company, if I come to you and say, John, you're serving your customers, your $50 million customer base using PDF, you're stuck in 1970s, John. You need to change. You'll ask me how much it's going to cost. I'm going to put a number that's good. You have no problem in paying that. But the next thing you are going to ask, two questions, most likely. Who in our team needs to interface with me? How long that will take, right? The numbers that I'm going to give you there, I need a point of contact. Oh, he's already busy. And this is going to take 6 months to do it. That you're not going to like. Now I can come back and say, John, once the initial phase is done, we can roll that out in a week or in 3 weeks, right? Something like that. Now you're going to change, right? Now you're
Absolutely.
going to pull the trigger on that. Now you see the value, and if you could serve your customers way better than that you have done for the last 35 years in 3 weeks. It doesn't cost you an arm and a leg.
No, it's fantastic, right? I mean, and I think that's a great analogy, which it's like you said, that's that whole acceleration, right? Of how much faster we can improve and change.
Yeah.
Well, Gigi, I know we're coming up close to our time here, but I wanted to check in with you too and see if there were any other key things that you really wanted to highlight for the audience, especially with innovators and folks trying to monetize their innovation. What are your sort of final thoughts?
I will go back and say, in order to serve and become relevant in whatever areas we do, be human, meaning strengthen your curiosity, have passionate about what you do. If you don't have it, there are other people who's going to replace you very fast, and have that more than ever. The world your customers need people who can think like owners in their shoes. And now you have tools to do that. Capitalize on what you have. Hold on your curiosity and passion and creativity and be successful. You could do that today.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. And we'll make sure that in the write-up that we'll include your website and the various contact info. Just such a pleasure talking to you. I truly have enjoyed our discussions, and I really look forward to having some follow-up discussions here in the near future as well.
John, thank you for the opportunity to share the knowledge and experience that I have. I truly appreciate that. Look forward to staying in touch with you and serving some mutual clients.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gigi. I appreciate it. That's another episode of Monetizing Innovation. Thank you.